I'm going to get us started. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Yolanda Fair, and I am one of the Assistant Juvenile Defenders with the Office of the Juvenile Defender. And it is our pleasure to have, I think this is our fourth virtual series of 2025. Today, we're going to spend some time talking about immigration collateral consequences. And it's my pleasure to introduce Helen Parsonage, who's a partner at Elliott Morgan and Parsonage in Forsyth County. Helen believes in providing caring, thoughtful, and thorough representation for each and every person she represents. In particular, she focuses on helping individuals navigate the rules, procedures, and processes for clients that are facing criminal charges and deportation. She represents clients facing criminal charges in both federal and state court, and she is a member of the Criminal Justice Act panel of attorneys in the Middle District of North Carolina. She is also admitted to practice before the Eastern, Middle, and Western District federal courts, as well as the 4th and 11th Circuit Courts of Appeal. She received her Bachelor's of Arts with honors from the University of Birmingham, and she graduated from North Carolina Central University School of Law, where she graduated summa cum laude. And she is a member of the Forsyth County Bar Association, Forsyth County Criminal Defense Trial Lawyers Association, the North Carolina Bar Association, North Carolina State Bar, North Carolina Advocates for Justice, and the American Immigration Lawyers Association. So I'm so excited to have her here today. I'm going to pass it on to her.
Wow, that was quite a mouthful. Thank you so much. That's one of the, I guess, one of the consequences of getting older, right? Is that list gets a little bit longer. So I'm going to try, we tried this before and it worked fine, but now there's a bunch of people on sharing my screen. Probably won't work, but we'll try it. Yolanda, just let me know if we are sharing. I think we are.
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to talk today about defending children from ICE. If any of you have been around for a while, I did give this presentation a few years back. It's interesting how little has changed, and unfortunately how much of it was under Trump 1.0 that I gave this in the first place. So some of the things that I would have had to take out under the last administration are unfortunately still extremely relevant. So let's talk about defending children from ICE. The good thing is that now the number of children that you can defend from ICE has increased now with the raise the age. So that has been absolutely fantastic for my clients. Sad for some of my older clients who got in trouble before then. But so who's going to be impacted by immigration consequences? So let me give you the Immigration 101 in a very short, abbreviated form. So obviously anyone who is not a citizen potentially could have immigration consequences. And it's not really, I'll, in the next slide, talk to you a little bit about how you figure out these things without becoming an expert in immigration law. But really, folks fall into one of these 5 categories from your point of view, relevant to your practice. So obviously, you've got folks who are citizens, which as of today, and I think actually forever, is people who were born here. Okay, I don't think the attempt to amend the 14th Amendment by presidential fiat is going to go anywhere, but still we have to watch this space. I certainly don't want to say that couldn't really absolutely never happen, but I really don't think it could. So you've got anybody who was born here, a lot of clients that you might get who were born abroad, but to US citizen, parent or parents are quite possibly citizens as well. Kids who've got green cards, kids who are permanent residents, they may have limited exposure. Kids who are here on a temporary visa, that's going to be, say, mom is here on as a college professor on a temporary work visa, and they've got a dependent visa on that. Maybe they have a student visa, now we're up to 18. But a lot of young people that you see with temporary visas are going to have one or other of their parents is here on some kind of temporary work visa, some kind of contract or project that they've come to the United States and are then intending to leave. Obviously, anybody who is undocumented, anybody who has got no papers at all. A couple of words about undocumented folks. You will never hear me refer to any human being as illegal. And I would hope that criminal defense attorneys would really understand that, because even if you have broken a law of some kind, or in these cases, sometimes it's just a civil infraction, that doesn't make you an illegal human being any more than getting a speeding ticket or, you know, a conviction for shoplifting, or, to be honest, a conviction for homicide. It doesn't make you an illegal human being. We would never say that about a US citizen. So the only difference between an undocumented person and yourselves is a piece of paper, just like the only difference between yourself and a married person is a piece of paper, right? For what it's worth. You may still see some younger folks who have DACA, although most of them have, in fact, I imagine just about all of them will have aged out of juvenile court by now, because we haven't had new DACA applications since 2017. So DACA may be one of the things that you don't have to worry about anymore, because a juvenile is unlikely to have DACA. So the next question I get asked by a lot of folks is, how the heck will I know? I'm not an immigration attorney. How on earth am I going to know if they're a citizen or not, or what their status is? The easiest way is to ask. It really is that easy. It's just a question of forming the right habits, right, with your clients. I get calls or emails all the time from defense attorneys saying, this is with adults mostly, but the district attorney has offered to plead, to reduce the plea from this kind of charge to that kind of charge. And I almost always have to email right back and say, well, what is their status? Because my answer will change if they're undocumented or if they've got a green card. The answer will be very different. If they're undocumented, it might not matter what you plead it down to. If they've got a green card, it may not make any difference either, but for a good reason. So the first thing to do is always ask your client where they were born. Okay, if they say they were born in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I get interesting answers to that question. When you say, where were you born? Some will say at home. Some folks will say in a hospital. Others will say Forsyth County. Others will say the United States. So people, the where becomes, sometimes you have to focus that down a little bit. But obviously, if somebody says they were born in Raleigh or Winston-Salem, then chances are you can stop your inquiry, right? Because we don't have many diplomats and ambassadors residing in North Carolina, so it's unlikely that anybody born here is not a citizen. If they say they were born outside the United States, then you might want to ask them these other questions, okay? Or call somebody like me, right? Because you may ask these questions and the answers you get don't help you very much. You're not quite sure. That's where somebody like me or one of the other immigration attorneys here in the state would be happy to help you. So ask where their parents were born. If their parents were born here, they may be citizens. Ask if they have any immigration status, but don't ask it like that. Ask if they or their parents have papers. Okay. Do your parents have papers? Ask the parents if appropriate. Ask the client or their parents if they, say they have papers, what kind of papers? Is dad a medical student? Or has dad got his resident green cards and everything like that? Simplest way to just start this conversation and to begin to get a little bit more of an awareness of and a habit is just have your office, if they have not done so already, add country of birth to your intake form. So right under date of birth, put place or country of birth, and then at least you will know to take the conversation a little bit further if you need to. Obviously, if they're born here, you're pretty safe to stop. Don't become the victim of assumptions. And, you know, over the course of many years of doing this, it's sometimes easy to do. The two times where assumptions can catch you out is assuming that somebody who doesn't speak English is not a citizen. If they were raised in a Spanish-speaking household, for example, or if their parents were born and moved here from the southern Texas, southern New Mexico, where just about everybody speaks Spanish and no English. It was, after all, Mexico until I was going to say the century before last, not last century. So the fact that somebody is not fluent in English or has a heavy Hispanic accent does not mean that they are an immigrant, so don't assume that. But even more importantly, sometimes, because I think this is a trap, because somebody looks and sounds like a good old boy from rural North Carolina, don't assume that they're a US citizen. I had a gentleman come in a few years ago. He walked in the door, he was wearing denim work overalls, like farmer overalls, had a big beard, gray hair. He spoke with an absolutely perfect North Carolina rural drawl. And so I was trying to figure out why this guy was coming to see an immigration attorney. Turns out he was brought to the United States when he was 3. He was a German citizen, and the family that brought him here and adopted him never finished the paperwork trail for him. So he had actually been undocumented for most of that time. You never would have known to look at him. I have clients come in who you know, from the way they speak, the way they dress, everything about them, you would assume that they were African Americans born here. Turns out, you know, they may have been brought here from Africa or the Caribbean when they were small, and they may actually be Jamaican or Senegalese or so don't make assumptions. Don't only ask people who appear to be immigrants where they were born and make notes, because I have so many clients tell me, my criminal defense attorney never asked me if I was a citizen, they never talked to me about immigration, you know, and so on and so forth. And that can be disastrous. Okay, so there are 2 kinds of people that we're worried about, and we don't have time, and Yolanda will kill me if we sit here for 5 hours doing all this. It's Friday afternoon. I know you don't want to go outside, at least not here in Forsyth County, where it's gray and miserable and pouring. But there are 2 kinds of immigrants, and they have different questions, which is why I always ask attorneys, what's your client's status? And if your client entered the country legally, has a green card, came on a visa, you're concerned about whether they can be deported. We use that word for everybody, but it's not actually strictly accurate to do that. If your client entered the country without papers, then you're concerned about what's called inadmissibility. Even though they're here, they're considered inadmissible. Let me give you an analogy that I hope will help this stick in your mind. Cast your mind back to undergraduate days when folks would throw a party, especially when, you know, you got past the first year and people were in houses, or maybe even in high school when the parents were out of town, right? You got a nice house, you invite a bunch of friends over, and you're going to have a good time, and you hand out invitations, and people come to the door, you know you've invited them, you say, come on in. and you have fun, and then it gets to be about midnight or maybe 1 a.m. and there's that one person, we all know them, there's that one person who just can't take the hint, right? They're going to stay there talking and drinking and yakking it up until the wee hours of the morning, and you're ready to go to bed, right? Those are the equivalent of people who entered the country legally but overstayed, which is half the undocumented, right? So they were invited to the party, but they just will not leave, right? They like it here, they're not going home. But if you remember, there's also those folks who manage to, come in through the back door. They hear there's a party. They weren't invited. You specifically didn't want them, maybe, but they come in through the window. Somebody opens the door, lets their friends in, and you end up with a bunch of people you didn't invite and feeling uncomfortable with, perhaps. But those are the gate crashers. Those are the people who come across the border without an invitation, without a visa. Okay, so it's like the US is a big party. Some people have invitations but won't leave, and other people didn't have an invitation in the first place but come anyway because it sounds like it might be a good time. Right now, there are probably about 12 million of these folks in the United States, people who don't have permission currently to be here. They've either overstayed their invitation or they never had an invitation in the first place. And the best we can tell, they're divided roughly 50-50 between those two groups. So, going back to Trump 1.0, building a wall to keep undocumented folks out, that only deals with the problem of people who came without an invitation anyway, make it harder for them to sneak in the back door. People who came in with an invitation but won't leave, it doesn't matter how tall the wall is, right? If they flew in on a plane from Paris, you're not going to do any good. So whether somebody is deportable or inadmissible is really different when it comes to criminal convictions. So that's why I ask you, what exactly is their status? Not just to be difficult. Okay. So what are the immigration impact? Obviously, adult convictions are their own beast, but you also unfortunately have to deal with the fact that some of your juvenile clients end up in adult court, and despite your best efforts, right? So let's talk about juvenile adjudications first, because that's what you're mostly interested in. So let's start with the good news. The case law has been pretty clear on this since 2000, in fact, where the BIA, which is not the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is sort of like the Court of Appeals level, if you like, for appealing immigration court decisions. So this is still good law. Juvenile delinquency proceedings are not criminal proceedings. Acts of juvenile delinquency are not crimes, and findings of juvenile delinquency are not convictions. So that is great news, right? So you don't have to worry about the criminal consequences of juvenile adjudications, because they are not criminal in any sense. Now, do they come up sometimes in discretion? When judges or the Immigration Service is looking at discretionary stuff, does it come into questions of good moral character? It can, although I sometimes wonder how immigration finds out about this if their immigration attorneys are not unlawfully disclosing juvenile adjudications. And maybe somebody will correct me, but it's my understanding that I am not at liberty to disclose juvenile adjudications to anybody. So I don't, because, and there's nowhere that asks, have you ever been, had a juvenile adjudication? It's all about criminal convictions and arrests and charges and those things. And so I often wonder how immigration gets hold of those unless somebody has disclosed it who shouldn't. Sometimes immigration attorneys don't understand this stuff, the criminal stuff, either. So are all your clients safe? So, it's like, okay, talk over, Helen, you can stop talking. There's nothing else to say about any of these things now. So unfortunately, that is not the end of the story, because there are some things where you do really need to be on the lookout. As I said, cases may be transferred to adult court, which will mean then, of course, all bets are off. Their convictions, it's criminal, everything changes. You don't need to you don't need to be thinking about juvenile, you need to be thinking about adult. So I keep the case in juvenile if at all possible, as if I need to say that to juvenile defenders. But if the case is anybody who's not a juvenile defender primarily, as an immigration attorney, I would love it if you could keep everything in juvenile court and not ever let them transfer it to adult court. But I know that does not happen. Yolanda, I will say with screen sharing, I cannot even see the chat. So I am relying on you to jump in if there's something there that you feel you need to jump in on, because I can't even see it.
Yes, I definitely will monitor it. People, thank you so much for joining. Please feel free to put questions in the chat, and I will monitor it throughout the presentation.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions. Please put them in the chat and stop me, or say, stop, I don't know what you're talking about. There are some other potential problems that your juvenile clients could run into, which are not separate for juveniles and adults. Some of these, if you have it, well, now the age has gone up to 18. I used to say that you didn't often see reason to believe that juvenile was involved in drug trafficking when 16 was the cutoff. There are not a lot, I don't think, of 14-year-old drug traffickers. But now it goes up to 18, maybe it is. There doesn't have to be a charge, there doesn't have to be a conviction, there just has to be some evidence that leads an immigration officer to have reason to believe that your client is, selling drugs or is acting as a runner or a mule for a drug trafficker. That's where I think young folks could get into trouble, where if they're being exploited by adults to deliver drugs or mail packages or do those kinds of activities, I think that can be a danger. So we have to do watch out for that. This next one is, it was a big deal under Trump 1.0, which is why it got put in there, not so much under other administrations. But if any of you have read anything in the news in the last few weeks, you know that this is now a huge priority for the current administration, to the extent that they are rounding up individuals who they just think, for some very nebulous reasons, might be involved in gang activity. Right now, it's, tattoos are, it would be funny if it weren't tragic and infuriating to see that Department of Homeland Security's own materials that they've put out for officers on how to identify particularly this brand new threat to the world, Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan gang. At least one of those samples is the forearm of a middle-aged man who lives in the Midlands of England and is slightly bemused as to how his forearm photograph that he had posted somewhere has now been taken over by Department of Homeland Security as proof of Central American gang affiliation. He's the least likely Venezuelan cartel member you probably have ever seen. And the same goes for some of the others. But I don't have to tell you lot that gang validation is a lot of BS most of the time. That it can be based on very flimsy notions of what makes somebody a gang member, but certainly young Hispanic men with tattoos are going to be looked at very carefully and are going to need you to keep an eye on what goes on, you know, who's hanging out at the courthouse, who's looking at them, you know, hopefully keeping tattoos off the record and out of sight, long sleeves preferably. It's just ridiculous that a tattoo of a flower. One young man was picked up and he had the, well, one of the validated gang tattoos is actually the Michael Jordan, you know, slam dunk tattoo that I forget, I'm not a sports, but one of the, whether it's Nike or Adidas, one of those companies uses that stylized basketball player jumping. He had one of those, they arrested him. Another one had a rose with his mother's name on it. Another one, say there's this clock on the arm of the English guy, and then one of the young men who ended up in El Salvador in Bukele's concentration camp had an autism ribbon tattooed, you know, the classic ribbon shape, and it had the jigsaw pieces on it for autism. And because his brother is on the spectrum, and it was a show of solidarity with his brother, and some bozo from Department of Homeland Security decided that was a tattoo, so he must be a member of a criminal gang from Central America, and he ended up in El Salvador. So watch out for these validated gang associations and fight them, you know, from the beginning as much as you can.
Hey, Helen, there is well, two comments. Julie said that she said, I just saw something that a man with a three wise men tattoo was determined to be gang related. And
Yeah.
then there's also a question from Darren Day. He says, maybe you will address this later, but if a case is removed to Superior Court, will even a conditional discharge, which requires a plea of guilty, count against the defendant in an immigration proceeding?
Yeah, let me say on the tattoos, I think you're going to find all kinds. So, you know, what we knew about gang tattoos, and those of us who've been doing criminal defense for a while are pretty familiar with, you know, UBN or Crips or Latin Kings and what the standard tattoos, and we all know to look out for the 3 dots, you know, here, and certain key things that, you know, when our client says, I'm not a tattoo, I just like dots, you know, we're like, yeah, right. But now it's anything, you know, all bets are off, stupid stuff, right? So, and I can imagine that there's 3 wise men, all kinds of things, you know, so it's not just the comedy tragedy tattoos and the classics that we thought we knew, etc. Yeah, I can talk, let me see if I can get this, go back to adult court just to address that without spending a huge amount of time on adult convictions. For immigration purposes, a conviction is any time there has been either a finding of guilt, a plea of guilt, or an admission of sufficient facts that would constitute guilt. So the conditional discharge that we have now in North Carolina requires an admission of guilt, right? And once you've got that, all you need is some restraint on that person's liberty, some punishment, however small. You put those two things together and it's a conviction for immigration, even though it's not a conviction in North Carolina. So somebody has a conditional discharge for, misdemeanor larceny, they have to plead guilty, they have to do, I don't know, a few hours of community service, or they have to pay a fine, then that is a conviction for immigration purposes. Okay, so even though for our purposes, for North Carolina's purposes, at the end, the result is a dismissal. Immigration doesn't care. There is no de minimis exception to the punishment, so a fine of $5 would do it. That same rationale applies to a PJC. Okay. If your client gets a PJC, but has admitted guilt, as long as there is any kind of fine or restriction on them at all, it's a conviction. The good news there is that if it's only court costs, the Fourth Circuit have said that court costs are not a punishment. They're an administrative process, right? So if you've got a PJC with just costs, then your client is going to be okay. But any kind of restriction, so whether it's a $5 fine or a 10-minute video or going to an anger management class or unsupervised probation, anything is going to turn it into and why that went back all the way back to the beginning. Sorry about that. I don't know what I touched. So, so let's talk about, they've got summary, right? Here's a conviction. If they're found guilty, I mean, those are obvious, right? If there's been a formal judgment of guilt, they are convicted. That overlaps, the Venn diagrams there overlap completely with what you understand. But it's the finding of guilt with some form of punishment, even if it's later dismissed, does not matter. So your 1996 has always been a conviction. I've lost track of the number of people who've come to me all happy because they did a 1996 and it's been dismissed and even worse, expunged. So I can't even see what happened. And they were told, you're good. Well, if you're not citizen, you are far from good. Okay, 1996 is bad news for a non-citizen. Conditional discharge is bad news for a non-citizen. Again, these do not apply if your client manages to hang on in juvenile court, right, for the reasons I state. So hopefully that doesn't, answers that question. I'm quite happy for Yolanda to circulate these slides afterwards so you don't have to memorize this stuff because it's Friday afternoon. So actually, we skipped ahead. I missed a couple of things. I want to go back to this. So we were talking about gang activity. Multiple adjudications. Again, now juvenile goes up to 18. Maybe there'll be more findings that your client has engaged in prostitution, that does not require a conviction. So be careful to try and avoid making a record of that if at all possible. There can be problems for juveniles if they are found by the Immigration Service to be a drug addict or abuser. Those terms are pretty much understood the way they are in the DSM. So, and they become health related. So that's where the person may be considered a danger to themselves or others as under mental health grounds. It can be important, if at all possible, to keep evidence of self-harm out of any record that could be public. Fortunately, juvenile files are sealed, but certainly self-harm or threats of harm to others can come back to really bite non-citizens in the future. False claims to US citizenship can be a problem. And so that's why it's important for you to know if your client is not a citizen. The plea transcript doesn't count, but still you need to be aware that, you know, if your client has presented a fake birth certificate to try and get a driver's license, or, you know, to presented a fake birth certificate for any other purposes, there may be some or to get a job, said that, you know, they've been working part-time and they've checked off on the box that I'm a US citizen when they're asked to prove, you know, when you have to give your driver's license, your social security card, that we all do with new jobs. So watch out for those. And if any of your clients are defendants in DVPO cases, and that happens every so often, you will see a DVPO brought by a parent against a minor. Violations of a domestic violence protective order can also bring your client to the attention of immigration, and we all know how easy it is to violate a DVPO. It's not like, you know, just trying to call or text mom or something like that could be sufficient. Okay, so those are some other things to watch out for, just, you know, so that it raises a red flag. And to be honest, if nothing else, that's what I'm hoping that you take away from this. It's like everything else about being a lawyer, right? You can't know everything, but when something comes up, there's just that little light bulb goes off in the back of your head and say, oh, didn't Helen say something about that? Pull up the slides or shoot me an email or a text, and let's make sure that that's really all you're going to be able to do with this stuff. It's I don't know about you, but it's most of what I think of as practicing law. It's like, oh, wasn't there a case about that? Or, yeah, I seem to remember there's a statute says something about that. And at least at this point, that's sometimes the best I can do. So knowing what flags, how can you help your juvenile client if they are undocumented, sometimes ending up in with a juvenile defender can be the best thing that ever happened to this kid, not just because you take care of them and you walk them through and get, you know, make sure that they're getting the help that they need from the counselors and everything like that, but if you can spot some of the things that might actually help them get a residency or get a green card, or maybe proof that they're actually a US citizen, you can be setting them up for success for the rest of their lives. So that's why I give you these again, just in the back of your mind. If your client's parents, either of your client's parents are citizens, that should set up a red flag that somebody needs to look at whether your kid who thinks they're an undocumented immigrant is actually a citizen. And you know that, and I've had that, where, you know, I was hired to help with a case where two undocumented immigrants, brother and sister, were charged with, you know, some larceny and breaking and entering. It was breaking or entering, misdemeanor, but still things that could get ICE coming looking for, you know, sniffing around their cases. And I was able to show, after asking them a bunch of questions, that they were actually both United States citizens derived from their parents, and we got them US passports, and at that point they only had to worry about a misdemeanor breaking or entering, and they didn't have to worry about ICE coming sniffing around their cases. So that's, you know, it happens. I've had it happen several times over the years. It's not a unicorn. Right? It actually happens. What happens if your juvenile client comes from a household where they are with a single parent? So mom's absent or dad's absent. There is a provision under immigration law that provides residency eventually for immigrant juveniles who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents, not both. I know that there's a lot of overlap between juvenile court and, dependency, abuse, neglect, abandonment cases. A lot of attorneys go into both those courtrooms and deal with some of the same things. A lot of folks who are in juvenile delinquency proceedings have some problems in their home. They maybe come from a single parent home. There may be something going on at home that would allow them to get special immigrant juvenile status. The young kids who get in trouble are often troubled, right, in other ways as well. The Violence Against Women Act, which is great but totally misnamed. Right? It really should be now considered the Domestic Violence Act because it provides protection for spouses, minor children, and in fact parents of abusive United States citizens. So your juvenile who may be in delinquency proceedings, as you are looking, you may find that this child has been mentally, physically, or emotionally, psychologically, it doesn't have to be physical, abused by a United States citizen. They may be able to file their own paperwork independent of, and unfortunately, now that we're seeing, now that juvenile now includes up to 18, I think you're more likely to see spousal domestic violence, right? But if that's coming from a US citizen, then they have this option to apply. But it's violent, it could be violence against men, okay? It does not matter what the gender or gender identification, if we're still going to use that word even though we're not supposed to, right? How somebody gender identifies is not relevant under VAWA. It applies to same-sex relationships as much as it does to cis and hetero relationships. What happens if they've been the victim of a serious crime? As a lot of, I used to do juvenile adjudication cases, and I would say a significant percentage of them were victims of criminal behavior themselves, sexual abuse, physical abuse, but maybe not from a citizen. If they file police reports, if they are willing to testify against or help in an investigation or prosecution of the perpetrator, then they may be eligible for something called a U visa. I know as criminal defense attorneys, sometimes these U visas feel a little bit like, it just feels a little kind of, I don't know, uncomfortable because we're not used to being on the side of the prosecution, right? But if your client needs this kind of help, make sure that you find them somebody who can help and continue to assist them. Unfortunately, a lot of our younger clients have been victims of trafficking. Trafficking, not just in the sense, I do try and get this out here. When I tell people that trafficking victims can get status in the United States, the answer is obviously, people think of, like sex trafficking, which unfortunately is common enough, but it's not limited to that, okay? It's limited, it's broad enough to include labor trafficking, so child labor exploitation, which happens to a lot of our younger non-citizen clients as well as, unfortunately, citizen clients. So if they're being forced to work, if they are being, let's go back to our drug traffickers, right? If they're being forced to act as mules for drug traffickers, that is forced labor, right? That is abuse. And that is something that you need to be speaking to an immigration attorney. So just watch out for these flags. They're, they're unfortunately quite common, right? For our clients that they're victims. So
There is a question.
yeah.
It says, for the U visa, must the perpetrator be a U.S. citizen, or simply the victim of a crime is sufficient?
Yeah, no, it just has to be if the perpetrator is a US citizen, then you're hoping that you can get under the Violence Against Women Act because it's faster and easier. If the perpetrator is not a citizen, then you would be looking at a U visa. And there's an enumerated list of crimes that qualify, but it's quite long. Basically, any kind of serious crime that is going to cause physical or mental harm to your client. So you can imagine that that's fairly broad. If in doubt, talk to an immigration attorney, because if it doesn't qualify, they'll tell you. But at least you've tried. Right? So here we go. We're going to look at here's how you figure out if your client is a citizen. Sometimes you can push the issue and your client can become a citizen. If your client is under 18 and their parents have got green cards and could become citizens before your client turns 18, your client automatically gets to ride those coattails to a US passport, and that means that they would not be deportable. Is your client in the process of being, or have they been adopted by US citizens? So just really think about whether they might not be a citizen because of their relationship to because of their parents, as well as their own situation. Again, you don't have to understand all of this. It's complicated stuff. Even immigration attorneys have to sit and think about it. So don't think you need to know everything. Just be ready to just spot that you need to get some more. So your client gets sent to adult court. We talked about earlier about what is a conviction. It's a lot easier to get an immigration conviction for immigration than it is to get, well, we've got all these things in North Carolina that are not convictions, right? We've say, like I mentioned, we've got 1996, we've got conditional discharges. If any of you practice in districts where the district attorney is still willing to do an old deferred prosecution, the statute is still good. A lot of district attorneys want you to do the conditional discharge, but if you can get a deferred prosecution, there's no admission of guilt for a deferred prosecution, so it doesn't qualify, okay? And if you're even luckier and you live in a district where some of the prosecutors will still do a back of the shuck deferred, where they say, okay, come back in 2 months with a sign-off sheet saying they've done 10 hours of community service or whatever else it is that they want to do, and I will just take a dismissal, but that's never put on the record because it's just back of the shuck. Those are great, right? There's no formal judgment of anything, right? It's just a dismissal. I understand that unicorn is still alive in some counties, so if it's your county, I'm jealous. I wish it. Forsyth, I don't think we're still getting those. But if you can get a deferred or a back of the shuck, good on you. You've saved your client from the clutches of ICE, which is as important as saving them from the clutches of the jailer, if not more so. So here's, I'm just going to briefly. I wanted you to have on the slides little bullet lists of the things that you would be looking out for. So for special immigrant juvenile, has the child been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both? Doesn't have to be both. Abandoned is the most common because, dad walked out when the baby was, 6 months old and has never been seen
Olha,
since. That's abandoned, right?
Arthur, eu quero que fique marrom aqui, ó. Que fique em cima desse negócio aqui, assim, ó.
Somebody not muted. I don't know who that was. So, you know, abandoned is easy. You know, if dad walked out when the child was 6 months old and has not been seen since, then that's also neglected because they're probably not sending child support. I had one client that was referred to me by the judge who was being prostituted by her own mother. She was being basically sold to mum's, you know, lent out to mum's boyfriends. It was a total, really horrific case, but she clearly qualified for this. Are they in juvenile court for abuse, abandonment, and neglect? Can you get a judge to find that reunification is not viable? And can you get the judge to find that the child is not in their best interest to be sent back to the country of birth? And this all has to happen before they turn 18. This is a really good instance where you probably need an immigration attorney. I know in the county where I am, and I'm without naming names, there are some judges who will make those findings in those bullet points, and some who absolutely refuse to because they believe that they are somehow called upon to not help undocumented immigrants. Go figure. But there's a lot of judges out there who do this very, very willingly and very happily, and it's life-changing for your client. So does your child have a US citizen or parent, LPR parent or spouse, more now that they've raised the age? Have they lived with that person at some point? Was the child subjected to abuse or cruelty by that person? If not the child, what about if, you know, they live with mum and dad, but dad is a citizen and is abusing mom? The child can often ride the coattails of that case as well. So you're looking for domestic abuse in the household. Unfortunately, you're going to find it quite frequently with juvenile adjudication cases. U visas, victim of a qualifying serious crime, there has to be a police report. This, you know, for VAWA, they don't even have to ever call the police. The 50B is great evidence, but you don't need it. For a U visa, we need a police report. We need a victim who they themselves or their parents were helpful in the investigation, and you need a law enforcement office or a district attorney who's willing to sign a certification to that effect. Okay. Again, that varies county to county. Some law enforcement agencies have a dedicated person who does this work, who signs these certifications. The opposite end of the spectrum, you have law enforcement agencies in North Carolina who will not sign off on one of these, whatever the crime, because again, they feel called upon to do nothing to assist an undocumented person. Same goes for DA's offices. Some counties are great, other counties suck. So there's nothing else, no other way of putting it. North Carolina, you know, California, they have a law that actually requires district attorneys. It's taken the discretion, state law has taken away the prosecutor's discretion to not sign it because they don't feel like it. If the person has been helpful, reported the crime, and the district attorney has prosecuted it, then they are required to sign off. We don't have, nor will we ever have, I imagine, a law like that in North Carolina.
Well, there is one more question in the chat from Alex. He says, what is the citation for special immigrant juvenile status? Thanks. So is there a citation for that?
I will add that to the slide when it comes, before I send it to you so that you can look that up. Okay.
Thank you.
That's my clever way of saying I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I could just give you the statutory side. You see what I said before? It's like I know the statute's there, so I know to go and pull it. I can pull it when I need. So sex trafficking, obviously, is clearly going to be a T visa. But the Sec B, I think, is really important for everybody to remember that there can be, you know, child labor, any form of any form of work that is done through some kind of coercion. Even wage theft can be qualifying for a T visa. So, you know, T visas have been issued to people who've been, say, promised wages and never paid, and then told, don't, you know, if you try, what are you going to do? You know, I'll call ICE on you if you cause me any trouble. Those kinds of things can qualify folks for trafficking visas. T doesn't stand for trafficking, but it's a useful shorthand way to remember it. It was just the next letter in the alphabet, okay, when they created it. So there is no need to assist in an investigation if it's the person is under 16. So if you are if you have the sad situation where somebody has been the victim of A or B and is under 16, they don't even have, they don't force them to go through the added trauma of reporting it and going through, you know, testifying against the person who did it. There are some sensible provisions in immigration law. It doesn't seem like it some days, but there are. Okay, so there are a number of resources. I'm assuming that you are familiar with the second one of those, which is the, you know, the immigration consequences of criminal convictions at the School of Government. I think that URL is still the right one. You probably would just Google it, or you probably have it bookmarked. So I don't need to tell you. There is an organization called Support Kind, which specifically talks about these things. Kind also deals specifically with juvenile issues. Since I did this slideshow, there have been a proliferation of resources and nonprofits that focus specifically on non-citizen children. You know, that most of this was coming from the unaccompanied minors at the border issues, and also, you know, if you remember from Trump 1.0, the whole baby jails at the border. So that caused such an outcry that there are a lot of organizations out there that can help you make sure that you have all the resources you know. There are a bunch of immigration attorneys in North Carolina. You may already have your favorite immigration attorney on speed dial. If you don't, feel free to reach out to me, and, you know, I can either answer your question or refer you to somebody closer to home, you know, to sort of somebody local to you who might be able to help you, you know, who might be able to help you a little bit more close to hand. I will say that your juvenile clients who are undocumented, I know that that group are always subject to stress, anxiety. You know, a lot of them have got difficult childhoods, difficult home backgrounds. I can't imagine I could never imagine what it must feel like to stand up in a court accused of doing something wrong when you're 8 or 9 years old. So they're already stressed out, right? And they've got people saying bad things about their parents in front of them, bad things about them. Children, undocumented children, are acutely aware of community fears and concerns about ICE activities. They are acutely aware of the fact that their parents might be taken away from them at any moment, or when they go home, that their parents might not be there when they get there. So it is, I think, particularly right now, you know, and even small children are aware of this because it's just in the air, right? Their parents are stressed, the community is stressed. They hear things from their little friends, they hear things at school, they catch snippets of conversation. Your juvenile clients who are undocumented or who are not citizens are vastly more stressed now than they were this time last year or the year before. So while I know we're not we are not mental health professionals ourselves. I think it's really important that you be cognizant of your clients' added stresses and anxieties over and above your citizen clients, which is already sufficient, right? Just to be in juvenile adjudication is stressful enough for a child, I imagine, without this added layer of, are they going to come and deport my parents? Are they going to come and deport me? Are they going to throw me in a juvenile detention center and then are they going to put me in a baby jail? What's going to happen? So their fears are very real and are going to impact how they can help you. They may be worried that anything you do or anything you do to help them might get their parents deported, which is so an added level of sensitivity, I think, is required. So I'm going to stop share so that I can see the chat and I can see you guys as well, which I haven't been able to do. There we go. Please, at this point, I've stopped sharing. If you've got any questions, how about we just raise your hand and unmute yourself? I think that would work just as well at this point. I'm sure there must be questions. Let's see some familiar faces.
I think we have a raised hand from Kayla Jackson.
Okay, I'd say just can folks unmute themselves, Yolanda?
Yes, I believe so.
Yes.
Okay.
Hello, you guys. This was very interesting. I definitely learned a lot. My question is about how do we advise our clients who are afraid to come to court in the first place? What do we tell them to help erase the possibilities of FTAs and called and fails?
Right. I mean, my general, and this is going to vary, each attorney is going to have their own feelings about this. Obviously, we are not ethically allowed to advise our clients not to come to court. And I'm assuming that applies equally to juvenile adjudications as it does to criminal court. I think the best thing you can do for your clients is to be conscious of what is going on at your courthouse in terms of ICE presence. The public defenders as a whole are usually pretty aware. I think, and I know it happened last time, so it doesn't surprise me. I do believe that ICE has been seen in the Guilford courthouse within the last week. I know they did that under Trump 1.0. Are they coming to juvenile court? That would be a really good conversation, I think, to have with your chief district court judge, because immigration is allowed, ICE is allowed in public areas. So a district court is arguably a public area, right? Anybody can walk into district court. I'm not so sure that anybody can walk into a juvenile court because it's confidential, right? The members of the public
Ellen,
just walk in.
it's not confidential unless specifically closed. So juvenile court is open to everyone just as a regular district court
Okay.
unless specifically closed.
Thank you, Julie. It's been a while since I've been in there and I appreciate that. You might want to talk to your chief district court judge about whether they want to put any protections in place to make their juvenile courtroom off limits. And I haven't heard of any such incidents. I would be, if anybody does, I would be very interested to hear about it. And please let me know if you hear, because I think that's important information to disseminate. I don't think it would look, at least for all the time I've been practicing, up until this point, optics has been important to government agencies, and ICE has not appeared to want to show up in juvenile court and drag children away. I wish that was something I could promise. That's why I think it's important to screen your clients right up front, because if they are going to be detained, if you've already, if ICE is going to come and you've already established that actually this person is a US citizen, or this person is, has a special immigrant juvenile eligibility or a VAWA or a U visa, at least you will have started that in process before any of this happens. I hope against hope that none of you get to report that ICE has shown up in juvenile court. And they better not show up in juvenile court in Forsyth County, because Julie will be there waiting for them.
Hey, I can still carry my cane just for purposes.
Yes.
But so no, and just so you know, one of the issues also is if clients don't show up in court, then there's a show cause for the parents for not being there, or for the juvenile not being there, things like that. Then you have law enforcement actively looking for your client, as opposed to just coming in and being served by a court counselor. And so there are some other issues if they don't come to court in that regard.
Julie, is the docket public for juvenile court?
No, the docket is not, but anyone can walk in and sit unless it's specifically closed for a particular hearing.
Yeah. So, unlike regular district court, at least ICE would not know in advance that there is somebody with, and how does ICE know if somebody's undocumented? They have a very sophisticated system of looking for Hispanic names. It's the same system they use in the jail.
Yes.
So if they can't see the docket, then they would have to be just showing up on the off chance. So that also makes it a little less likely. There are only 6,000 active ICE enforcement officers in the entire country. And I told you there are 12 million undocumented folks, so they're still having to triage to a certain extent. Anybody else got any questions?
Well, since nobody does, I'm just going to tell you thank you for always putting up with my messages and texts and calls saying, dude, what the hell? So
Yeah.
I always appreciate your help. So, and if you guys haven't met Helen, she's awesome.
So there's proof I do answer emails and texts. So when I say feel free to reach out, there you have it. I do, by and large, if I can, I will answer you. But just be
I think the
prepared for
last
me to
one-
ask you questions.
Yeah, I think the last one you were on vacation and you answered me, and so yeah, which
Yeah.
you shouldn't do, by the way.
Well, it doesn't wait.
Well, Helen, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I know this was helpful for me, and I know that was helpful for everyone on the call. Nani has put in the chat a link to our evaluation, if you guys would be willing to fill that out. It's a short 7 questions, and we will send out Helen's presentation as well as that link and her contact information via email after the training. But if there are no more questions, I will end us.
Everybody
I'm just
wants to
making sure.
go. Everybody wants to go. It's Friday afternoon. It's like, stop. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you so much again, Helen, and thank you everybody for joining us on Friday.
Oh, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Everybody take care. Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend.